So Curse of Peladon is a banger of a story. It's the first of the Purple Era not to feature unit in any capacity, with the entire story set on another planet, something we haven't seen since the Space Pirates, or I think you could even argue the Crotons. We also have Brian Hales returning as the writer, so let's see how this stacks up against his previous work. So Curse of Peladon has quite a lot going on during its runtime, but the first episode having the Doctor and Joe mostly separate from the rest of the cast. This episode focuses on setting everything up, with King Peladon getting a lot of focus, alongside the Federation delegates. The Doctor and Joe are mistaken to be the delegation from Earth, with them pretending to be them to avoid being executed. So let's talk about the curse itself, as it's the key aspect of this serial, which allows for the villains to hide their actions. So the Curse of Agador itself is of course a legend about a creature named Agador, who will rise up to protect King Peladon, with all the attacks on the delegates being attributed to this curse, with the Doctor obviously opposed to the idea of it, and senses a plot right from the beginning. This makes the serial into a bit of a mystery story for the characters, although the audience is aware of who's behind the attacks, as it's revealed from quite early on that it is Hepesh, who is the High Priest and an advisor to King Peladon. While that's revealed to the audience from early on, the serial does hide this from the characters, with them focusing their efforts on someone else, who they think is behind the sabotage route, with the main and obvious culprit being the delegates from Mars, the Ice Warriors. For the first half of the serial, the Doctor is incredibly suspicious of the Ice Warriors, due to his history with them, and puts the blame on them when anything happens. This makes up the plot for the majority of the middle two episodes, with the blame soon shifting towards the Doctor due to him being found in the Forbidden Area, which leads to him being forced to fight for his life. The final episode focuses more on the conflict between Peladon and Hepesh, and how he achieved it, with him trying to take over Peladon. It's generally a simple enough plotline, but there's a lot happening throughout, mostly through the characters distrusting each other and trying to figure out who's behind the attacks. So to explain the character conflict, we have to talk about why Hepesh did what he did, and who he was working with, as revealing that will make this easier to explain. So Hepesh didn't want an alliance with the Federation, as he feared they would completely take over Peladon and destroy its culture, and so he made an alliance with one of the delegates, that being Octorus. This alliance allowing Octorus' people to mine minerals from the planet, due to their planet not having the same wealth of minerals. This does make Hepesh interesting as a character, with him putting the future of Peladon above all else, with him turning against the King's wishes to do this. Although the most interesting scene with him is when he shifts the blame towards the Doctor, but gives him the opportunity to escape, showing that he doesn't necessarily want to kill anyone unless it's completely necessary. Episode 4 sees the shift towards Hepesh trying to take control of Peladon, through less subtle means. And I think this is the less interesting side of his plan, because the build-up of the curse and using the superstition of his people to hide his actions is very interesting. So with the plan to stop the alliance discussed, let's talk about King Peladon himself, as he's the one behind Peladon's attempted entrance into the Federation. So Peladon is a young king, whose mother was a human, and so he has a connection to humanity and Earth, which is something which pushes his want for Peladon to enter the Federation. Okay, side note, but the serial doesn't actually establish whether or not his name is Peladon, that being his first or last, or if it's a title of the king. And the only reason I bring this up is because who names their kid after their planet? So this desire to bring Peladon into the Federation is what motivates him throughout, with him putting most of his focus on making sure the delegates are safe, although he doesn't do much to try and figure out what exactly is causing all the attempts on their lives. Beyond that, we also have his blossoming relationship with Jo, who he wants to marry and make her Queen of Peladon. This influences his decisions considerably at times, with him often being vulnerable to his feelings for her, which changes his mind on decisions, notably changing the Doctor's punishment slightly later on. But due to this relationship, alongside the King's partly human heritage, there is a thought by some of the delegates that he could be being used by Earth to further its own interests in the Federation, which adds to the mystery of who is behind the attacks, as it opens up new possibilities for the attacks, or at least who is siding with Hepesh. It does end up feeling a bit of a throwaway aspect of him being partly human, due to it being mentioned in passing on occasion, but it means a lot to Peladon as a character, as this heritage is something which pushes him into pursuing a place in the Federation. There are also plenty of scenes in which his mother is insulted due to her being human, and he takes it incredibly personally, these insults often being by Hepesh. This is the most interesting side of his character, although I think it could have been expanded on further, and really fleshed out the potential effects of his heritage on the people immediately around him, and the people of Peladon. I also have to mention the fact that King Peladon is played by David Troughton, making his third appearance in the show after The Enemy of the World and the War Games, but even more importantly, he is of course the son of Patrick Troughton. But let's talk about the delegates of the Federation, beginning with Octorus, as he is the least interesting of them, and I've basically covered him already. He's not that distinct from the other delegates, although he does have the most unique design, as he's a head in a jar basically. Obviously he's the evil one, with him helping Hepesh for his Plaid's own gain, although due to the twist coming at the very end, with being revealed following his death, it means we don't get much of him being discovered and potentially put on trial for his crimes. On the other side of things, we have Alpha Centauri, the character introduced in this serial who has probably gone the furthest. So in this serial, Alpha Centauri isn't the most interesting, mostly serving as a character who's pointing out how dangerous everything is and wanting to leave at every opportunity. Centauri does often come across as a loud and screaming creature, but does show a level of intelligence, but without really any opportunity to show it, although they do rely on their position as a delegate and the power and authority it gives them more than the others do. The last of the delegates are the Ice Warriors, with there being 2 of them. This serial gives us 2 different types of Ice Warrior, the first being the more conventional soldier that we were first introduced to, and the other is a newer version of the commander we saw back in Seeds, with him being Commander Elixir. When it comes to the Ice Warriors in this serial, it really takes them back to their peak, which we saw in their original appearance, with them both being characters in their own right, although Elixir is the more prominent and important one. This serial also expands on them with a big twist, which is that the Ice Warriors aren't the villains, with them having become a far more peaceful people than the warriors we saw before. This doesn't mean that they aren't violent or aggressive, but they are far more able to hold back, and throughout the serial we see them working towards a grander cause. But despite this change-up, they are still a very honourable race.
The doctor saved my life. Now I intend to save his.
This change-up to the Ice Warriors is really cool and very surprising in the serial, but it works well to show their growth, making them more than just monsters to be defeated. This also works to show a very rarely shown side to the Doctor, that being his own prejudices, as he views them as the enemy right from their first meeting, and the clear villain trait until they prove themselves to be the good guys, with them saving the Doctor's life on several occasions. In spite of what he accuses them of, and the several things he does to them, notably when he actively tries to find evidence that they are responsible. This is something which Hepesh and Octurus take advantage of, with them placing evidence in places which points the finger towards the Ice Warriors, notably when they fake an attack on Octurus and place a piece of his life support system in the Ice Warriors' chambers. This use of the Doctor's previous encounter with them is to inform his decisions, which works incredibly well to subvert the audience's expectations, because ours are the same as the Doctor. This newer side to the Ice Warriors does make them really stand out, even if the 2 of them aren't the most interesting as their own characters, although Elixir does get some time where he's more fleshed out. Now let's talk about the main 2, beginning with the Doctor, as he's the least interesting of the 2 here. Now that doesn't mean the Doctor isn't interesting, but by this point he's been so well defined and fleshed out in this incarnation, that it feels like we're not seeing newer sides to him as often now, which doesn't hurt him, but just makes him less interesting to talk about. This serial does give him plenty of moments where he shines, notably when he uses the psych screwdriver to make a device that he's able to use to hypnotise Agador. We also have him getting to take part in a one-on-one fight for his life, which really lets him shine, as although we've seen the Doctor fight a bit before with his Venusian karate, this is the first time that it's a bigger battle with higher stakes. We also have him singing a fuller version of the Venusian lullaby that was introduced in The Demons, which he sings to the tune of God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen. On the other hand, Jo really gets some unique opportunities to shine in this serial, with her getting great moments from the start. We notably have her going out on her own to try and get evidence that proves that the Ice Warriors are behind the attacks, which leads to her capture. But the big thing for her is that she has to pretend to be a princess, as not to be killed due to going into the throne room. This gives us some great moments, but really allows Katie Manning to shine with her performance, with Jo acting far less common and putting on an upper class accent. Well, at least for the first episode. She loses that quite quickly and reverts to commoner Jo. Although something to note about Katie Manning is that she and David Troughton began dating during production, although this wouldn't last too long. So with the characters covered, I want to mention what the serial's about, as it's not just a story about the Ice Warriors turning good, but instead it's a commentary of England at the time, notably its entrance into the EU, with there being clear parallels between Peladon as this small country entering into a larger group. There isn't much I can say about this, as I'm very unfamiliar with the grander political climate of the country during that time frame, and now. Although one thing to personally note is I didn't watch this story until a few months after the UK left the EU, which kind of makes me wonder why we never got another Peladon story talking about it, especially given how long that process ultimately took, to the point that I was completely unsure that we actually left, or as I joke to anyone I know, if we've left yet. Finally we have the restoration, and this will be a quick one, as the entire serial was restored with reverse standard conversion. So that's it for The Curse of Peladon, a bit of a deeper story than what Hales has given us before. It's definitely a step up from the previous serial, and even the previous season as a whole. While its commentary has been somewhat lost after all these decades, to the point where the next generation of viewers won't have any idea what it's commentating on, there are still plenty of strong moments despite this, especially the use of the Ice Warriors and their big twist. It still holds up due to its characters and the plot, and really feels different to what the show had been doing recently. Plus, its production values are incredibly high for a sci-fi setting. But with the Doctor and Jo done with their adventure on Peladon, they return to Earth to reunite with the Master and face a cousin of an old enemy who has been hiding under the oceans for 100 million years. Next time, the Sea Devils.